Give glory to God, our light and our life.
Oh, come, let us worship Him.
We sing during Palm Sunday a wonderful, wonderful hymn that we have the kids process in with. And this hymn is about 1,200 years old, called All Glory, Laud, and Honor. And I just want to sing the first and the last verses of this. I'll switch to the next page, which has the words. But it is such a wonderful hymn that it really seemed like we should sing it. All glory, laud, and honor to you, Redeemer King, to whom the lips of children make sweet hosannas ring. You are the King of Israel, and gave His royal Son. Now in the Lord's name coming, our King and blessed One. All glory, laud, and honor to you, Redeemer King, to whom the lips of children make sweet hosannas ring. As you receive your praises, accept the prayers we bring. O source of every blessing, our good and gracious King. All glory, laud, and honor to you, Redeemer King, to whom the lips of children make sweet hosannas ring. The church started doing Palm Sunday processions with palm branches and stuff actually a lot later than you would think. Right about 800 AD, and this hymn was written in Gaul, what is now France, for that very occasion. So this hymn has actually been sung about as long as children have been processing in with palm branches in church, which I think is really cool. This is from our Old Testament reading for this morning. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And we kind of have Jesus walking in. Why do you think that they put their coats and palm branches down on the ground in front of him? It's kind of weird, you know, don't you think, to take your coat off and lay it on the ground? Why do you think they did it? Beata, what do you think?
It's kind of like rolling out the red carpet.
It is. Yeah.
As he's royalty, and on his path they put a red carpet.
Ah, so it's like rolling out the red carpet and making it so that you wouldn't get dusty by putting things down on the road. The roads, this road kind of looks pretty clean, but the roads were often very, very either dusty or even really muddy and messy. And so when you would put these things down, that kind of made it so that you could walk on the road. And they did so to honor Jesus because he was the king. And so we sing, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna to the Son of David. Ah, pretty amazing. Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, you sent your Son, our Savior Jesus Christ, to take upon himself our flesh and to suffer death upon the cross. Mercifully grant that we may follow the example of his great humility and patience, and be made partakers of his resurrection. Through the same Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Let us bless the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Almighty and merciful Lord, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, bless and preserve you. Amen. Off you go, paraders. I'm sorry I didn't get to introduce one of our guests to you this morning. We had a gentleman in early service named Jeremy Gerlach, who's one of our dear friends from Kenosha. He drove here this morning from Mountain View, which is what, about 150 miles or 140 miles, something like that. And he had to get back because he was working, and he had to get back to work by 12. So that's a lot of driving, and I'm very, very thankful that he made it. Jeremy was the chairman of our school board in Kenosha for years and years and years. And a wonderful, wonderful guy. They have 4 children that are about the same age as our kids, and just a great family. So super bonus to have him here. All right. Wednesday and Thursday are business as usual. We are finishing the book of Isaiah on Thursday. Normally, I would not have Bible class on Monday, Thursday, but we have 1 chapter left. And I just couldn't bear the thought of taking a week off just to finish 1 chapter. So we're wrapping up Bible class on Thursday with Isaiah. We will do something in the New Testament afterwards. This is for both of the Wednesday morning and Thursday morning men's Bible classes that I teach. So the week after Easter, we will start something else. I haven't decided what yet. If any of you who, especially those of you, of course, who come to those classes have any ideas, I am all ears. Please talk to me. Deaconess's classes are, I believe, as normal. And Life Flight on Lincoln Hills are still in recess, but we'll restart after Easter. Is that right, Barbara?
Yeah, I think it's the 3rd, the Tuesday.
The 3rd, yep. Tuesday the 3rd. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So we have, I have a handout for you, and this is a handout that lists all of the service times for Holy Week, of which there are many. And so lots of opportunities. And so I want you to take one for yourself to plop on your refrigerator. So when you're trying to figure out what time is that service at, you can know. But then take 2 or 3 copies to hand out to somebody else. Friends, neighbors, whomever it might be. We have lots. I'm just going to pass those around. That would be fantastic. Obviously, we have services Monday, Thursday, Good Friday at both noon and at the evening, the tenor break. The evening service is our service of darkness. It's kind of the opposite of the evening prayer services that we do during Lent, where we kind of progressively douse candles, which I will talk about in a little bit. Easter Vigil is 7 o'clock Saturday night. That is a wonderful, wonderful service. We usually get about, I don't know, 30 or 40 people maybe for that service, but it really is one of my very favorite of the year. It's just beautiful. And it's kind of the beginning of our Easter service, because Easter really begins at about sundown on Saturday night. Then Easter morning is the normal service times, 8 and 10:30, and we have the Easter breakfast in between services. So starting at about 9-ish, I had a typo on that in the first email I sent out on Friday, but it's actually between services, and our higher things youth are doing that. So that will be a great time had by all, and I'm sure they'll be setting up and figuring things out. Anything else on any of the service time type stuff or Easter breakfast or anything that I have? Pardon me? I probably did. I did. Wow, I'm so animated. Oh, daughter of mine, would you be getting me a couple napkins? Thank you.
We don't have a early service anymore.
We do not have a sunrise service. We do not. But we have an Easter Vigil service. And so you can think of that as a really, really, really early service. All right. Is there anything for the Academy, pray tell?
Just a couple quick notes. Construction has resumed on the second floor this week, so we're happy to hear the sounds of progress.
Yes. The noise of movement and life.
And then just kind of a fun fact to share, in April we'll have 107 students, and that will be the most students we've had enrolled
Ever.
ever.
Yep.
So
That is fantastic. 107, that's a big number.
it's a big number.
That's a big number.
Little people.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, we've had those little lovely sounds of construction going on and people frittering about all week. So that has been great. Gloria, please.
I just want to point out that on April 7th, Saturday, we're having the LWML Zone Rally here at Holy Cross. We're sponsoring it. This is for all the churches in Zone 19, of which there are, what, 10 or 12?
At least.
Okay, so I want to invite all the ladies to come to the Zone Rally, even if you're not a part of the LWML at least once a month. In the morning, we'll have a little short business, but a Bible study. And in the afternoon, the orphan grain train, there'll be a representative telling us about that. So I'm sending around a sign-up sheet. And if you're not sure, I'll put it back up here later so you can sign up even next week. This is kind of the last week I can make an announcement.
Right.
So I'm going to pass this around, and please feel free to sign up.
Fantastic. I would only add to that many of you know our friend Pastor Dennis Meeker and his wife Lorna, Deaconess Lorna from Kenya. Dennis and Lorna, I believe, will be in country at that time, and he is preaching for our opening service for the LWML thing, which I think is at 9:30. As I recall.
At 9 o'clock is registration,
Right.
and some snacks, and then it actually starts at 9:30.
Yeah. So Dennis will be around in the morning. He'll be preaching for that opening service. So that'll be super fun. Awesome. I have worked very hard not to overwhelm you with information about our Holy Cross campaign, which begins formally on April 8th, so the Sunday after Easter. But I wanted to mention a couple things about it, just as kind of a heads up on what's coming. You'll be getting a letter from the campaign committee and me on Tuesday this week, kind of telling you what all is going on. But probably the most important thing for you to know about at this moment, at least, is that we will be doing cottage meetings or cottage gatherings during the month of April, and I think going into early May. And Pastor Meyer and Gary Yee are in charge of cottage meetings, and so you will be getting more information from them about that once this initial letter comes out, and you will hear all about all kinds of fun things and who is doing what. We've got a lot of things planned, and I think it's going to be a great time. So that is coming up. You'll hear a little bit more about that this week, and then a lot more about it after Easter. Anybody have any questions on any of that. What's a cottage meeting? It's a meeting where everybody gets together in small groups and you build a little house together called a cottage. And you eat cottage cheese. No, basically it's a small group gathering that where we'll talk a little bit about Holy Cross, about kind of some of our plans together, talk questions about the campaign, kind of what that means and everything. And Gary and Pastor Meyer have organized it by neighborhood area. I think they've got about a dozen areas figured out, in really a lot more detail than I would have ever come up with, which I'm sure surprises nobody. So that will also give you an opportunity to meet some of the people that actually live near you, which I think is also kind of fun, because it's very easy to sort of gather together here week after week and not have any clue that maybe somebody lives 3 doors down from you and you don't even know it. So that I think will be a lot of fun. One of the things that I get on Mondays, Susie enters in all of the attendance stuff at the church, and on Tuesday I get a little email that kind of lists that, and it also shows me a map of where everybody lives that was in church on Sunday, which is very interesting just to look at and kind of see what, how, there's always 1 or 2 people from Yuba City, and the Wallaces from Vacaville, and we get people from up the hill and over the river and through the woods. It's quite an interesting gathering of people, so it's really quite fun. Any other questions? Whoa!
It's like hanging with your homies.
Hanging with your homies? That's a very hip sort of way of saying it. I'm not sure if I can be that hip.
I'm quite sure you can.
Oh,
That's okay.
Kind of a tough one. So, all right. Are there any other announcements, etc.? This is kind of our wrap-up study on the cross and kind of everything in connection with that. And I want to start by doing a little bit of show and tell, because it's here. It came on Friday, and we spent all day yesterday putting it up, and then promptly hid it. So you can't see it until Friday night. But I thought that you might be interested in seeing some of the pictures and learning a little bit about that process, because it was actually quite a bit more of an adventure to put up than we thought it would be. But projects are often like that. So let's see, Seth, why don't you hit the lights for me, and we'll kind of do that. To begin with, and I have mentioned this a couple times, but I will mention it again here. The company that we got the corpus, the statue from, is called Demet's Art Studio, which is a wonderful studio in northern Italy, in the Alps. And when we were looking at trying to figure out what to do and where to get it, we looked at a bunch of different used ones from churches. There are kind of church consignment stores and all sorts of things. And we ended up going with Demet's because we could pick the exact dimensions that we wanted, and so it would actually fit perfectly. And also because one of the options that Demet's does is that they make them out of all kinds of things, but one of the things that they do is they carve them out of linden wood, and then they will make a mold and make them out of fiberglass, and then paint it afterwards. So what we have is a statue that is a mold from a hand-carved wood statue, and then is hand-painted. So that's kind of what it is. So by all accounts, you look at it and you assume that it's wood, because it looks like wood, unless you're, getting up really quite close. It cost $4,800 plus. These are kind of, I'll say, pastor numbers, which means rough numbers. About $4,800, and it costs around $600 to ship here. So it was about $5,400 total. Then the painting and everything in connection with the painting cost approximately $1,000.
In painting the church.
Painting, right, when we painted the sanctuary. So that was about $1,000. And I'm very happy to say that, at least as of this morning, everything is completely paid for. So, so that's all good. What I put in the email on Friday was if you were still interested in donating, that would be wonderful. But I would kind of like to wrap this up by Easter, so that we kind of don't have another dedicated fund that just sort of lingers for 10 years for no reason. So, Lord willing, that is the plan. Yes, the treasurer is thankful for that, I'm sure. But that's kind of where it came down to. So the total for the entire thing, including the sanctuary painting and everything else, was about $6,500, start to finish. Or, if you prefer, roughly 1% of the capital campaign, which is about $550,000. So there's some numbers for you. Comes in a big box, and the arms screw on, which is kind of weird. But they are milled to like a fraction of a millimeter. So once you kind of get it in place, there's a teeny tiny little hairline that once you get about 3 feet away, you can't see it. So that's kind of what it comes to. It is 60 inches high by 59 inches wide. So that's the kind of the wingspan along the way. A couple other pictures. About 75 pounds. Well, that's what the shipping. You think it's less? Maybe with the packaging, it was 75 pounds. So it's probably more like 60, maybe even 50. 40, you think? Okay. Well, you were going up and down the ladder with it a lot more than I was, so I'll take your word on it.
It's less than a sack of grain.
Less than a sack of grain. That's the technical measurement for it. Less than a sack of grain. The eyes are open, but you have to be directly underneath to be able to see that. Even if you're standing at the altar, you can't tell. The eyes look closed. You kind of get a little bit of a sense of sort of the tone and the coloring. And I really appreciated the attention to detail with the hand painting. This is the picture of the stupendous 6, 4 of the 6, trying to figure out how to do this, which is not actually that nearly as simple as we thought that it would be. So you can kind of see brain cells churning away there along the way, because of course it has two bolts in the back. One right between the shoulder blades and one on the heel. But you know, I assume the way that this works is that the piece is put into the molding, and then it's kind of carved out. So what made it tricky was that this isn't square. It doesn't go straight in and out, nor is this a straight line. They're slightly off. That took us a while to figure out. And so that made the process of putting it up a little bit more complicated. Plus, the cross itself, you know, if you think of the cross, if you look at it from the side, it's going to look like this, and then there's a gap of about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter, and then the inside of it is kind of hollowed out, so it looks like a U. So you're kind of trying to figure out, all right, so we put the body in here, and then the bolt goes through there, and then how do you put the nut on, kind of going underneath the cross with the finger, and of course it's all metric because it's from Italy.
Yeah.
So So we had to find a 17 millimeter deep socket, and so it was quite an interesting project along the way to figure that out. I am just describing what happened here. If anybody else, especially those of you who are here for that, want to pipe in with any color commentary, by all means, help yourself. So you the way that they intend for it to be done is for you to take the cross. Well, I'm sure what they intend for you to do is buy a cross. When you buy the corpus, and they'll do it. Barring that, what they intend is that you put the cross on the ground, and then you hand line it up on the ground. But our cross does not come down easily. There are like 7 screws that are kind of on the top up here that hold it in place, and we decided that it would really be a lot more work to take the cross down than otherwise. Does that make sense?
Do you still think that?
Well, I was mostly observing and occasionally helping with trying to get things lined up. But I think ultimately that's probably true, because putting it up, taking that cross down and putting it back up would really have been a pain. That there's no doubt about that. So you can kind of see there. This was I don't think Chuck stayed for Bible class. Chuck had figured out to use a pulley to make kind of a winch system with the ladder there, so that they're not trying to physically hold it up while figuring all of this out, which was quite clever. So you kind of get a sense of how all of that's working. And so the real trick was once we get it up there, how do you line it up with this and with this and with this so that the wrist nail holes are halfway between the crossbar, and you get it all kind of at the right height. Also understanding that the bolt is going into the wood at an angle, if that makes sense. How long did it take us, Rick? What do you think?
5 hours.
About 5 hours. Yeah, I think everybody got there at about 9 o'clock, and I think we finished this part of it at about 2-ish. Something like that.
And how long were Jesus on the cross?
I know, exactly.
Good question. 6 hours. So yeah, and you can imagine there were a lot of smart alecky, not very pious jokes that were being made, as you can be quite sure.
I don't think there were.
All right, maybe that was just in my head, Rick. I apologize. You guys are way more pious than I am. What does INRI stand for? Anybody know or remember? Yeah, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. So this is also fiberglass, and so we kind of get that up there. So this is what it looks like once it's all kind of up and put up and done and lined up and everything. I'll let you guys look at it for a second while I warm up my coffee. There. Rick is more artistic than I am, so there's Rick's artistic one.
Nice.
Yes, ma'am.
Interesting, maybe I'm sensationalizing it, but the hands almost look like they're the fingers in the posture of blessing.
That is not an almost, Barbara. That is quite intentional. That's not. wouldn't say universal, but this is the kind of the hand of blessing, and Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, two natures of Christ. And so it would be sort of an interesting study to look, but it is pretty common in Western depictions of Jesus on the cross that you're going to see the hands in something like this. Yeah, the hands of.
The reason for that would be, at this point, with his eyes still open,
Yes, would still be alive, theoretically. Yeah. Now, and remember, when we kind of think about art, and this is sort of I think this is the interesting part of this, or one of the parts of this, is that any kind of art, no matter how realistic you're talking, even a photograph, is an interpretation of an event, is symbolic in some way or another, right? We talked a lot about symbolism and realism and kind of abstract versus concrete, etc. So this is not what Jesus looked like on the cross. It was a lot messier and bloodier and not symmetrical. We spent about 4 hours of that 5 hours being German and thinking about making it symmetrical. But that would not be. And so I think that's one of the interesting questions you always have with art is, what is the intention of the communication? What are you trying to convey here? And this is obviously more realistic than something that is completely abstract. But it is still symbolic. That's why you've got the hands in the blessing. That's why we've got the INRI just as the acronym, and we don't have Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, written in Aramaic, in Greek, and in Latin, which, if we were going for strict historical accuracy, is what the Bible has. So there are always these kind of little sort of bits and pieces, and as we talked about when we were looking at the cross earlier, even the actual shape of the cross. Is it a T like this, or is it more like a capital T with a crossbeam across the top, which is called a tau cross? There are lots of different arguments can be made with that, but Rick and I were talking about this yesterday, that in all likelihood, remember, you're talking about, this is not some sort of deep artistic event for the Romans. This is a job.
Yeah.
And they do this thousands of times a year. And so it's going to be whatever is at hand. It's not going to be, okay, now your job is to make sure that the crossbeam is exactly 1/2 the width of the length of the cross. It wasn't happening that way. So we're talking about things that are very symbolic in nature. Does that make sense? Everybody kind of tracking? Rick?
Yeah, nobody's more German than me with all my grandparents.
Yep, you've got the pedigree.
I as much, but I was the only one yesterday that was not going how to move about a quarter of an inch. They were moving those things this way and that way to get perfect.
That's your artistic nature, Rick.
And me, if I was to do this, I was just going to tie them up with ropes.
Yes.
Those 3 nails are not going to hold Christ on the cross.
Well, and again, that's so let the record show that Rick was not the most German person there.
The Germans shall not be blamed.
The Germans shall not be blamed for this. That's probably good. But yeah, so we kind of do that. Then the next challenge was veiling, and we had a minor question mark about the veiling and the whole thing. The original plan for this was to put it up a week earlier, on March 17th, and then to veil it and all of the other crosses. Obviously, it didn't get here until Friday, so we couldn't do that. So we did all of the veiling yesterday. But the next problem that we ran into is once the corpus is up there, the veil is too small. because you're talking about adding, you know, all of these other dimensions to it. So we had to do a little bit of work and adding another piece of fabric, and it's fine. But that was another hour and a half or something like that along the way. Does anybody know why we veiled the crosses? I have talked about it before, but it is kind of worth talking about for just a minute or two. Anybody know or remember? I had to do a little bit of refresher stuff on that. You can hit the light set. A little refresher stuff on that. The original practice came from the gospel reading for the 5th Sunday in Lent, which originally was John 8, where it has at the end of this is where Jesus has that little argument with the Jews about before Abraham was, I am, and how is it that you can be Abraham's Lord even though you're Abraham's son, and all of this. And at the end of that reading in John 8, the text says Jesus hid himself and walked through their midst. So that's where it came from, right there. Is from that notion that Jesus hides himself until he reveals himself at the time of his choosing. So he reveals himself on the cross. Another way of thinking about that would be something like, one of the ways that you can really draw attention to something is by covering it up, right? That's kind of across the board in many different ways. So if you want to draw attention to something, hide it. Maybe we call that the 5-year-old rule or something. You know, you tell a 5-year-old they can't have something, and now it's the only thing they can think about. And so that's where the practice came from. But there are lots of these little practices that kind of come into play during the last 2 weeks of Lent. And veiling crosses is one of them. And really, the veils, at least originally, were probably some kind of purple. And then when are the veils taken off? On Good Friday. Why don't they come off on Easter? Because they come off on Good Friday? That's cheating. Barbara.
Is that because that's when they next saw him?
I think that's kind of the right idea. That this is when Jesus reveals himself. Think of the centurion. Truly, this one is the Son of God. Jesus is revealed fully as the Son of God on the cross in his death. So this is when Jesus' glory, this is, for those of you that were at early service, when is Jesus' triumph? His triumph is on the cross. His glory is revealed on the cross. Think like John 3, right around John 3:16. Just as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, even so the Son of Man must be lifted up. Well, lifted up where? On the cross. So this is where God's glory is revealed in dying for the sins of the world. So that's when they are. And so at the end of the main Good Friday service, you have this little thing where you take the veils off. And that's when we'll dedicate the statue on Friday, at the evening service along the way. So that's kind of when that happens. But there are other little things that we do, like we don't sing Alleluia during Lent. And we kind of tend to simplify our liturgy a little bit more as we get closer to Good Friday, to a little bit less ornamentation. Kind of all of these things tend to get simpler and simpler to just focus on the bare words. So that's sort of the picture that happens along the way. Yeah. Any other questions on any of that kind of stuff? I'm just sort of giving you the little bit broader picture of the whole thing. So before I do kind of open Q&A for the rest of our time. There are, I think, 3 things that are left that we're in the process of figuring out. And this has been very, very difficult because I really like having things figured out and knowing what's coming. And so waiting on things is very hard. The first is candles. We took the candles off the wall, first of all because of the soot lines that were coming. Remember that? And we kind of decided to wait until after we get the corpus up and kind of everything else set before we move to the next step of figuring out candles. Well, we're getting really close to being able to do that. So that's kind of one of the things that we're stewing on in the next, I don't know, month or 2, let's say, is how many candles, where do the candles go, how thick or thin, do we take the same candles that we have and just put them somewhere else? Kind of all of those sort of questions are kind of thought through. But I wanted to ask you guys the question of what is the purpose of candles in church?
To have light when you don't have electricity.
To have light when you don't have electricity. Okay? Yeah, I mean, sometimes the simplest answer is really that the reason you have candles is for light, right? And the reason you originally had candles is for light because you don't have electricity. And so this is why, for example, there tended to be more candles in churches in Northern Europe than churches in Africa. Why would that be, I wonder? More light or less light, depending where you are. So now we find ourselves in this kind of this interesting place where we don't need candles simply for the sake of light, for kind of purely practical purposes. So how many and where do we put them and kind of all of those things. The way that I've tended to think about this is candles and everything that happens in the sanctuary serves the purpose of highlighting what's going on in church. That's always their purpose. And so we tend to have more candles during Easter season than we do during Lent. So that kind of thing. So we can sort of think about how do we do these things in a way that is going to highlight what's actually happening in church. Pastor Meyer.
We have candles for Jesus' sanctuary.
Let your light so shine. Is that what you mean?
I am the light of the world.
I am the light of the world.
It's
Sure.
a symbol of Jesus'
Absolutely.
presence.
And like many things, we have candles and light, and can kind of make those connections. We do that at evening prayer, right? So let's connect when we walk in with a candle. Jesus Christ is the light of the world, the light no darkness can overcome, etc. Candles are in the temple and in the tabernacle, so they have been a part of worship from as long as there has been worship. There have been candles and light as sort of a symbol of holiness and of God's presence, etc. Barbara.
Is it all right for feelings in church?
I'm in favor of feelings.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so where I'm going with that is, Jesus is the light of the world, and he says, let your light so shine before men. So when the candle light comes into the worship service, Jesus is coming into our space,
Right.
into where we are worshiping, and that is a visual for us. And at the end, when the lights are extinguished, they go out, the light goes out, and that is going into the world with the light of Jesus that was left with us.
I like the way you
That's
think,
my
Barbara.
view.
No, and that's good, and that's kind of another piece to the whole sanctuary worship thing, is that it's not simply about information, but it's about the senses, it's about sight and sound and smell and hearing, and all of these things kind of come in together. And so And so as long as these things are in service of the gospel, then this is good. And it's not a law that says, there is no law that I'm aware of that says thou shalt have X number of candles, but not Y. Right? And I have actually studied that quite a lot, and you will find nearly every combination of number of candles that you can come up with. You'll probably find a historic precedent for it somewhere. And so the question isn't what is the most historic precedent. The question I would argue is what are we using them for, and how do we use them to teach? Because that really is a big piece to it. Now I see several hands. I'm going to go right to left.
Well, and along with what Barlow said, and that is really true, and it helps all of us. I mean, a lot of times we think of children, but frankly, all of us, to kind of focus in. But also, at least many of us don't have candles in our house. I know it's more common people have candles as well. And it's kind of a clean form of let your prayers rise for incense.
Sure.
Okay, so we need candles. But it's that it's not normal. Church is not like our house.
Right.
Churches shouldn't look like any place else.
Right.
They're different. This is, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. I know that Walt. Walt.
Well, there's those two, we call the torches, that stand by the pulpit, and they kind of move around. Or do they not represent angels or protection, or what is it?
I don't know.
Okay.
Pastor Meyer, do you know? You probably bought
I do
them.
not know.
Okay, let the record show Pastor Meyer doesn't know, but he's going to answer anyway.
I know why we have two.
Okay?
Because when the processional cross was donated,
You got two.
we got two in a package.
There you go. Sometimes the reason you have things really are simple. Yep, I find that completely believable. And again, very practically speaking, I don't remember who it was. I don't think it was somebody here. I did have somebody, I think it was maybe after a funeral, say that they were totally stressed out about me preaching in the pulpit because they were afraid I was going to wave my arm and set myself on fire. And that has kind of made me aware a little bit of the placement of the candles and wonder if maybe there's a better place for it. We'll say that.
So, when we designed the sanctuary and wanted candles to represent Christ's presence,
Right?
the three got put on as double Trinity.
Right? Right. So you had three on either side of the cross, the wall ones. Yes.
But we had the processional candles kind of left over.
Right?
And they used to come out only for processions and then would end up in the back instead of where they are now.
Right?
And as we're looking at what do we do next, they really would work well in the back if they could be visible.
Well, and there, very practically, is kind of the dilemma with the whole thing. I think this is here. This is the best. I mean, you look at this. If you look at this space, this is kind of what we've been noodling on. Anything that is behind the altar is kind of hidden, unless it's at least this high, right? And so that's, again, very practically, that's kind of our challenge with candles, if we were to do the three, but also with flowers and with the offering plates. Kind of where do we put these things? Do they need to be seen? Do they not need to be seen?
Well, you don't want it to be a mess.
Well, right, and you don't want it to be cluttered. There isn't any real benefit to that I can come up with. So that's kind of the stuff that we're thinking about. It's the candles, the offering plates, and then the last one is sort of the question of flowers. Why do we have flowers in church?
Because they're pretty.
Because they're pretty. All right, I'll buy that.
They're living.
They're living. Yes, yes, yes. I would say we have sacrificed them for the sake of the whole. But nevertheless, flowers are there as a symbol of life. Remember last week when we talked about symbols of the resurrection, flowers and plants kind of go along with that because they're living things. And so we have these living things in spaces as well. So greenery is often kind of a part of the space for that exact reason, that this is a living, breathing place. And also, I would argue that's also a good reason why we don't tend to use artificial. Is if you're gonna do them with living things, because that's sort of the purpose. But looking at our space, that again is the how do we make it so that the flowers kind of look like they fit and belong where they sit, and that they're a part of the whole thing, and that they don't distract from the cross or get to the point of looking kind of busy and cluttery. So those are all kind of the challenges that I kind of like having these stands here. We've done that since we painted it, more or less. We tried them here, we tried them here. It doesn't really work to have the flowers at the same level down here because you can't see them. So unless we wanted to do something of raising them way up like that, which also goes to the candle, that's sort of the dilemma with the whole thing overall. Does that make sense? So those are kind of the three things that we're just sort of noodling on, and I am very, very open to suggestions or ideas. Probably the one thing that, in my mind at least, at this point is I don't think it's going to make sense to put something back permanently on the wall. I really like the versatility of being able to move things. But that's, first of all, I'm just one person. And that also may have to do with that question of what do we do with flowers and stuff. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about with all of that. Rick?
I got to tell you an interesting thing. I didn't think about it until you mentioned the idea of showing the life in the church. When my dad built that last church of ours in the 50s, he literally designed the pulpit in the shape of a flower pot, and it was set in a garden of complete green artificial plants.
Interesting.
The other thing he did is he would never allow anybody to put any flowers back there that were not white.
That were not white. That's interesting. Now, in my research on flowers, and yes, I'm that kind of a nerd that research flower practices in churches. The only flower practice kind of historically that I've found, and here we'll check your liturgical trivia instinct knowledge. Okay, you probably haven't been tested on that recently. What do you think is the one color that you were never supposed to use for flowers in the sanctuary? Catherine can't answer.
It's just because I worked in a farm.
I know. What do you think? The one color that was the illegal color.
Blue.
Nope.
Red.
Nope.
Black.
Yellow.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yellow was the illegal color.
I worked in a flower shop
Yep.
in Seward, and we would always do the flowers for church, and that was always the thing.
Yep. Why? What do you think?
It's not a liturgical color.
It's not a liturgical color.
All other colors are.
Yeah. You can find red, blue, purple, green, orange. Now, and this is where things start to get sort of liturgically squishy. Okay? Orange can be a shade of red. but it is in general those kind of the colors that you won't find in paraments that traditionally. Now you might also notice I have never ever once in the 6.5 years that I've been here said you can't have this color, not the yellow or anything else. Why? Because I don't care. And so I'll just say that yellow is a very pale gold, and it's but all of those things, and the reason that I kind of bring this up is simply to ask, what is the purpose of this stuff? Why do we have them? Why do we do them? As Lutherans, the reason we care about any of this stuff, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about crosses or plants or candles or anything, the only reason we care about any of it is if it teaches the gospel of Jesus Christ. If it helps us teach the faith, great. If it doesn't hurt teaching the faith, okay, then it's probably not worth messing with. If it prevents or harms teaching the faith, then we've got to look at it. That's kind of, in general, how Lutherans have done change or reform when it comes to liturgical type stuff. Because there's all kinds of things that you could say, it doesn't really hurt, it doesn't necessarily help, so it doesn't mean that we have to blow it up or change it just because it, but if something actually actively contradicts the gospel, then we gotta think about it, and then we gotta be very, very intentional about how we do these things and why we do them. So that's kind of how we care about these things. And I guess I would also add to this in kind of the broad category of what does it mean for us as Christians to think about our sanctuary as a place of beauty? That this is a place where God is at work doing wonderful, amazing things, and that this is a space that we care about, and that we care about because God is doing something here in a way that he doesn't do anywhere else. And so putting energy and time and work into these things is for the sake of those who hear and believe in this place, and for the sake of teaching the faith. And that's kind of what the point of the whole thing is. And what's hard about that, of course, is that there's lots of freedom in there, right? You can zig or zag with many of those different things. And it's not simply a matter of, okay, let me call the International Center of the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod in St. Louis so that they can give us the exact dimensions of how big the table's supposed to be at the back wall. It doesn't work that way. We have freedom, which means we actually have to figure out how to love each other and think about things together, which is much harder. All right. I want to show you one sanctuary. You hit the lights for a second. Have somebody hit the light real quick. Go. This is Mount Olive in Folsom. I don't know. Maybe somebody here does. I don't know when Mount Olive was built. I'm going to guess in the 70s, maybe.
Yes.
Does that sound about right, Barbara?
Yes.
Yeah.
60s.
Yeah, 60s to 70s, somewhere in that neighborhood. So this is their sanctuary. I don't believe that they always use the sanctuary for worship. Sometimes they use a gymnasium. But when I was at Pastor Hotgravy's installation, whatever that was, 5 years ago, it was in the gymnasium. But Renata plays at Mount Olive once a month.
No, not at
Not Mount Olive. She plays in Messiah. I'm sorry. Scratch that. So this is their sanctuary. I asked Pastor Hotgravy to send me a picture of it. There are a couple things about it that I thought were interesting. One was, you can't see it super well in this picture, but this is a palm frond that they kind of put across the front of it. My guess, I don't know, but my guess is that for Easter they probably use a flower spray, much like we used to, for across their cross. And then again they've got lots Lots of greenery in the front there, including yellow flowers. Good point, Isabella. Should I write him a letter about that? I'll try to restrain myself. Also notice that he took this picture for me last night, that they have a red or scarlet colored pyramid. That was one of the things that struck me about it, is that they don't have much in the way of pyramids or liturgical colors in here. Palm Sunday, the color is either scarlet, which is this deep red, or purple, which is what we have. But that's kind of what they do. And it's a very functional space. The ceiling's almost identical to ours. In my mind, it's also rather busy. There's a lot of stuff up there, and that kind of makes it almost hard to see and make sense of what all it is. But it is nevertheless a lovely space. All right, friends. Was there a question? Yes, Marion. That's a good question. I think that they are on the back wall. I think that you are right. I'll have to ask him how he does it, or if he does it.
Pastor, I kind of like how the candles curve under the cross.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's sort of a reverse candle thing. Yes, Pastor Meyer.
Altars are not supposed to be used for short spaces,
Yep.
but that's where the offering place are.
Yep, they got the offering plate on the altar.
No, behind.
Oh, behind the altar.
It's like a
Oh, you're
storage
right. That's right. They have like a shelf underneath or behind it. You're absolutely right. I'm not in favor of that. Next week, the week after Easter, we will begin living as the body of Christ. And we'll speak about many things. Pastor Meyer. Okay. And I did a little announcement beforehand while you weren't in here. So I think we're good. With that, let's close with the benediction. And before we close the benediction, just a reminder for the kids that we will have the Palm Sunday procession and that they'll line up right here in a couple minutes. Let's close with the benediction. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Amen. Thank you, everybody.